Hi, good morning, everyone, and thank you for joining. This is Office Hours with AvaTax, and I'm Ted Spence. I'm the director of the AvaTax API team, and I have with me today a special guest, Rohit Ghule, who's been with Avalara for, is it 11 years now?
Yeah, 11 and a half years.
11 and a half years, and he has worked with us throughout an amazing number of changes. And he's actually one of the original key people who designed the first version of the AvaTax API. So Rohit, thank you for joining.
Thanks for having me over.
Yeah, now you started in the Pune office, right?
Yeah, I started in the Pune office in 2006, and I was part of the team that designed our first SOAP-based APIs for AvaTax.
Yeah.
It was a revolutionary and new thing that we were working at that time, and we felt like, oh, we're going to change the whole world here.
Well, and we kind of did. I have the good fortune to be partly involved with this, and I'd like to show something, which is that we started with what I think was a relatively simple API. Back in 2004 was it when the first release came out? The team was starting with the basic concept that you should be able to just get taxed.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think that's why historically this thing was called the Get Tax API.
Correct.
And that's a very SOAP design methodology too, right? It's like everything in SOAP is a verb.
Yeah.
When you're designing a SOAP API, you say, well, what are the things people can do, and then each one of them is a verb, and you put it in.
Pretty much, yes. It's just like get, fetch, save, those type of things, all driven by verbs thing.
Yeah, and what's actually kind of interesting is during the 90s, back before I knew that there was going to be an official spec for what a web API was, I used to use like query string parameters and web pages to do things, and I got really excited when I learned about SOAP, because SOAP had this huge structure and this huge definition.
It's all like XML based, and there's WSDLs and handwritten WSDLs, and you had proxies and stuff like that our customers, our UX focusing teams were all using to consume the APIs that's all written in SOAP.
Right, and I'd like to point out here, this is the AvaTax developer site right here. And if you look at this, you can actually see there's a link, and that link allows you to still download the official AvaTax WSDL file. And WSDL is, of course, an acronym that stands for Web Services Definition Language. So this file right here is essentially a gigantic spec for everything that AvaTax is.
Correct. It explains to you a lot about all the actions that you can do. All the actions that you can do around using the WSDLs, around tax calculation, user profile management, and your tax profile and stuff like that. It just is a humongous big file about how AvaTax was built over a period of time.
Yeah, and one of the interesting things is because this WSDL file has been around for so long, this WSDL file is actually backwards compatible all the way with what we built in 2004, isn't it?
Correct. It's almost to the point where if I remember correctly, we still have very old customers on our first version of our API, which are about maybe 50 customers still there, who are using our 2004-2005 version of our API, because we have kept the WSDL compatible to all the changes that we have made going ahead in years.
And so I just want to mention to everyone, this is one of the key challenges that Rohit's team has been tasked with for the past decade, is we had this fantastic API, how are we going to improve on it?
Right.
And so when Jeff Meisner, the marketing manager here for the developer team, approached me recently, he asked for a list of topics people might be interested in, and I thought it would be fun for people to hear how Rohit and I have been challenged with upgrading our API over the years.
True. And then what happened is maybe a couple of years ago when Ted, or maybe 18 months ago when Ted was tasked to write the first version, the second version of our REST API for AvaTax, I was like, this is going to be an interesting project for all of for all of it.
Yeah.
We have a version 1 of the API, which is like a very small subset of things, which was just done only to cater certain functionalities that we wanted the customers to have it. But this version that Ted is now leading is a full-blown version of our AvaTax API, the SOAP API that we have. It's almost, I'm going to say this without a small bit of a doubt, the V2 API is much more flexible and stronger and more modern in terms of what the customer is able to do with our as compared to our SOAP API.
Well, thank you. I really appreciate that, but I would like to talk for the people here who are interested in API design. This is actually our third attempt at a REST API.
Correct.
So, it's a very common problem in programming circles when your boss comes to you and says, I want you to update this.
Right.
You say, well, all right, well, the first thing that somebody did is, I think it was perhaps Mark Withers who wrote the first REST API. And you can still see it here. It's tagged as the legacy REST API. And what Mark Withers did is he came up with a very, very simple REST wrapper around SOAP. And he only implemented those things that he thought people really desperately needed.
Right.
And it was functional. And if you see right here, there's a get tax version in REST. Well, and you know what? It is simply a copy of everything that was done. But it includes some words that are a little bit awkward. And this is the kind of thing that you start to discover.
Right.
The word get means something different in REST than it did in the SOAP world.
Exactly. And so that version of REST was basically driven or written in requests from some of our customers who said, we will not be able to integrate with REST, but we need a REST version of it. That forced Avalara to just go to that extra bit effort to get in like a REST version. And it just was like a wrapper over our SOAP thing.
Yeah, and it was functional.
Yeah.
And what I remember hearing is I talked to some of the people who did our second iteration of REST, and a lot of what fed their decisions is that they responded to the feedback. People looked at this and they said, this is not very REST-like. People complained, well, it doesn't kind of work the way I expect REST to work. So, in your opinion, what did we do in the second iteration of a REST API?
So second iteration of the API, we tried to change the whole world in that iteration itself, which was like, we're going to change the way the engine just behaves, or we're going to change the way our APIs are going to look, and they're going to look modern. They will have they will be more user friendly. They will have more things that we can support and stuff like that. But the way to look at it, and it was a little bit of a learning for Avalara on that, is that if you try to change the whole world in one go, it becomes too much after a while. The bite that you try to have, it just becomes too big. And
essentially, people had to make a choice. I'm going to use the old thing or the new thing.
Correct.
And that was problematic.
That was problematic, and people were like, I have already an integration working with SOAP. You guys are going to change everything that I have to do with this new API. It's going to change. It's going to be a cost prohibitive effort, and it's also going to be time consuming effort. I cannot put so much of thing in my business at risk and put a whole lot of effort on redoing the whole thing. And that's probably the reason. I still feel like that iteration of our REST API failed because we tried to do too much in one single go.
And also partly because we demanded too much of customers.
Correct.
So, really, one of the interesting things is that now on our unifying REST API, we have customers mixing and matching. I was just talking to a customer yesterday who was using the legacy REST API to call GetTax, which you see on the screen here. They call the legacy API for GetTax, and then they said, I want a way to commit tax. Well, they can call the modern REST API for commit tax. They don't have to choose.
Correct.
They can mix and match as much as they like.
Correct. Exactly. And that's one of that's the reason I said the third iteration of our the REST API that we've written is compatible with a lot of things that we have done in the past, and but it also brings a more modern ways of writing code and software programming. So that gives a flexibility of to the customer to just say, okay, I'm going to have one integration on maybe on SOAP, but I have this new website that has come up that can probably use our version 3 or like new version of the REST API. So that gives a flexibility to the customer to go back and forth between things and say, okay, my business is not impacted. Anything new, if I want, I can move to the REST API. So,
and I know you watched a little bit of this from the outside, but we invested a lot of time up front in making it possible for us to extend the API.
right.
So rather than just focusing on writing the absolutely optimal implementation of GetTax,
Right.
we focused on coming up with a pattern, a design pattern.
Correct.
And that design pattern made it possible for us to add all sorts of new things like contacts, customers, filings, locations, and so on, and we were able to add those very, very quickly.
Exactly. I mean, I remember in 2017, early 2017, I was in like multiple discussions with you and your team saying that I don't think this is not the way we should do it. We should be doing this way. And then you and me and probably the team just sat down and had discussion arguments and maybe disagreements or agree to disagree type of thing situation, and then say, okay, this is probably version 1. We can make it iterate better to have it and make it better in our next future releases. And then, I can confidently say that this version of API or the REST API has now become better in terms of our as compared to maybe a year ago. And it's now giving confidence to our integration partners to start writing their straight up integrations against our REST API.
Well, thank you. So I'd like to point out we're going to do this as a Q&A session. So Jeff Meisner from our marketing team is here. Say hello to everyone, Jeff.
Good morning, everyone.
So Jeff is going to manage the questions queue. So if anyone has a question they'd like to pose to Rohit and myself, Jeff will manage that. But just one interesting thing I'd like to point out, Rohit, you mentioned about how we had a lot of arguments and debates early on. And one of the really interesting things that I remember that we debated about was, what is the right way to do things in REST?
Right.
And REST is a very flexible, very interpretive art form, isn't it?
Correct. It gives you so it's a double-edged sword. You do it the right way, and you'll get benefit. You'll benefit a lot, and customers will love it, and you'll get a lot of feedback, and you'll get a lot of accolades for that. But if you do it the wrong way, it will come back and bite you and hit you and cut you at places where you don't even want to get there. It's difficult because if you make a wrong decision in terms of a pattern or implementation, it's going to have a cascading effect on your maybe your databases, your consumers who are going to use the API, and your integration partners. And that's the reason the debates that we had were fruitful in driving the right decisions. Maybe we didn't get it right at the first iteration, but over a period of time, we've got to a position now where I feel like we're getting to a position where it's gotten better.
Yeah, and I'd like to point that one of my interesting experiences out of these debates was that I would meet with one of our key employees, Eric Arzt, and I would talk to him about how he wanted things to work, and then I would implement it the way that he wanted it to work. And then I would talk to a different employee, and the different employee would say, no, that's not RESTful, we can't do it that way.
Right.
And so it was really difficult resolving that. And one of the things that we were able to come up with as a way of bridging this gap is that we found a very helpful design guideline that was published by Microsoft. And this design guideline was relatively familiar to our SOAP pattern, which was really interesting.
Right.
Have you looked at this recently? Actually, I can't bring it up on the monitor here in the room to show you, unfortunately. But one of the really interesting features that the Microsoft REST API supported was filtering. And in the Microsoft filtering approach, they had this language where you could specify a field and then a comparison command and then a value. And this this format right here was actually very, very similar to the way that SOAP worked.
Right.
And so we looked at this and we said, if we choose this design pattern, we would have the benefit that we would be able to help and support our customers who had used the SOAP design pattern in the past,
right,
and make it easier for them to upgrade.
Exactly. And I mean, the team, the DevDoc team and then the API team has taken a lot of effort to do a lot of documentation also that is customer friendly and integrators friendly.
Mm-hmm.
And all these things that we have put on our website is also helping customers to look at examples how to write our code. And it's more of, like you said, it's consistent to our SOAP integrations in the past.
Yeah, it's not exactly the same, but it's close enough.
Exactly. It's consistent enough to say, okay, I get it. It was years ago in the 90s or 2000. It was a pattern we used at that time. But in the modern 21st century, this is probably the one that we want to do with it.
Yeah, and like this particular document really helped us to get away from that person by person disagreement problem.
Correct.
You know, it meant that we could go to everyone and say, here is a spec, and this is the spec that we're building to.
Mm-hmm.
And this really reinforced for us the value of all of that documentation you talked about.
Yep, exactly.
Is that, like, if we did not document our API to the degree that we had,
mm-hmm.
then people would continually ask these questions.
Right.
So, Jeff, speaking of questions, do we have anything from the chat room?
We do. We've got quite a few questions, actually. The first one is, what is the Microsoft API pattern?
Okay, well, the Microsoft API pattern it's actually called the Microsoft API Guidelines, and it's a page on GitHub where they documented in specification format their strategy for how the API works. And there's a lot of detailing here, and there's a lot of really interesting stuff. And we've tried to do our very best to follow it, but Microsoft is continually working for this. They're continually refining this design document. And, you know, really, we should go back more often than we do and recheck our stuff and see if there's anything useful that they're putting in here. I've met the Microsoft guys that wrote this spec, and they're actually really, you know, really diligent people that are working hard to come up with a coherent strategy for how an API can work. And I've told them the one thing that I wish that they'd really improve is the error codes. So what we did in REST is we decided to come up with an interesting use case page, and the use case page has a full list of all of our error codes. And so if you, for example, get the error taxpayer number required, we'll actually have a web page, and the error itself will have a link to this web page that explains what the error is, why you're seeing it, and what you should do. And in this particular case, what it tells you is this field is absolutely required if you are subscribed to Avalara returns. And a lot of people in the past didn't used to understand what these errors meant, and we're trying to do our very best to explain why these errors exist.
Correct.
Yep. Hope that answers that question. I'd also like to point out on the developer site here, we have this fantastic book that some of the people on Rohit's team helped me to write, in addition to people all throughout the company, called the AvaTax Developer Guide.
Mm-hmm.
And what we did is we went one step further beyond just documenting the API. We said, here's the purpose why the API exists.
Mm-hmm.
Here's why things happen the way they happen.
Right.
I know a lot of people have challenged me on this. They ask, why is customer code required?
Right. Yeah, customer. It's again a legacy thing that we've built it over years, where you needed to have an identification of a customer for whom you are doing a tax calculation, and that's the reason customer code is needed.
And nowadays, it is a specific feature that if you provide customer code and if you use Avalara exemption certificates, it will make that customer automatically exempt if they have an exemption certificate on file.
And that was one of the drivers. Like you need to identify your customers. So going ahead, if you say if this customer comes back and says that I have exemption certificate, okay, provide your exemption certificate. We will be able to grant you like exemption on your tax. And that feeds into one of our bigger features in AvaTax, which is exemption certificates. And AvaTax exemptions is one of our primary and premier product that we have on our Avalara product suite.
Yeah, and I think this is part of why, like, our company's motto, we don't say we calculate tax. What we say is we do compliance right.
Correct.
And exemptions, handling exemptions correctly is a key part of compliance, and it's much more complex. Like, handling tax properly and being compliant is much more than just calculating a tax rate.
Correct.
There's a lot of people out there who come to us and say, just give us a dump of all of your rates. Well, that's not the same as being compliant, is it?
Exactly. Yeah, I mean, the way to look at Avalara gives you like a whole solution.
Mm-hmm.
It's a whole fruit. Once you have that, once you eat the whole fruit, you feel like, okay, I've got the whole, I'm getting the whole fun of having maybe I'm getting a full feeling of a fruit salad.
Yeah. And that's really why the REST API is so big nowadays.
Mm-hmm.
We have information about filings, we have information about certificates, we have information about tax content API. Oh, geez, Jeff, I'm sorry, you're reminding me that I have to go check on the questions again.
Yeah, hang on, let's see, there's another one coming in.
Yeah.
Okay, so this question is, I want to download all my transactions from AvaTax. How can I do it using the API?
Okay, well, so downloading a list of transactions. So first of all, we should mention that we have some reports. There is a report API that was built a little while ago that allows you to export document lines. And this API is actually surprisingly popular. I just had somebody tell me the usage counts on it. I'm not allowed to mention them in the webinar,
right,
but they're much higher than I thought they would be. So first of all, if you're interested, there's a reporting API that allows you to create a report and check to download it.
Mm.
However, that may not have the exact detail that you want. The other thing you could do is that there's an API called list transactions. Let me see if I can find it here. List transactions by company. So now this API allows you to do filtering. So you can specify, I want to list all transactions on January 1st, 2018. So one thing you could do to list all of your transactions is you could call this API and you could pass in a date range. So let's actually try it right now. This is actually just a little interactive test. I'm going to call this and fetch transactions for company default. And I'll just say I only want the top 10 transactions. Well, let's see, I've got a transaction on March 1st. So now I'm going to say date equals 2018-03-01. So I should now be able to fetch all of the transactions on March 1st. So one way that you could do this is you could actually just iterate through all of the days that you want to fetch, and you could call this API once per day.
Mm-hmm.
You could just say fetch everything where date equals 2018-03-01, and then you could go in a loop, 0302, 0303, and so on, and just download all of your transactions. So this is the more detailed way. This will give you more information than the report, but it's up to you which one is appropriate. Hope that answers the question.
You've got another question, Ted.
Yeah.
I have a project I wrote using AvaTax SOAP. Do I need to upgrade it to REST?
Well, that's very clear. You don't have to upgrade anything if you don't want to.
Correct.
So we continue to support SOAP alongside REST. SOAP, maybe it's out of fashion in development circles, but it's still there and it still works.
It works. And people have their integration still working on it. Like connectors or whatever integrations that we call, like with ERPs and stuff like that, like the Microsoft range of ERPs that they have, Dynamics range. People have, we probably have a few thousand customers who are using the SOAP API. They're still using it. Their businesses are able to process tax calculation, get their business moving ahead. So I think it's still valid. You don't need to, in my opinion, if it's working for you, you don't need to upgrade.
Yeah, and right here on this call, you've got Rohit who built the SOAP API, you've got me who built the REST API. They work together,
right,
just like Rohit and I work together. So everything that I did when building the REST API was to seek his advice and to make sure that we built it in a way that made sense and allowed us to be future-proof. You don't have to upgrade if you don't want to. You're perfectly fine to mix SOAP calls and REST calls. One of the things that I will tell you is we are investing a ton of time and effort in making our REST API as thoroughly documented as possible. And if see right here, the documentation for the SOAP API really focuses on only the 10 or so most useful methods. I know there is documentation for other parts of SOAP, but it's definitely not as thorough.
Okay.
So if you are interested, you're always free to mix REST and SOAP. Jeff, did they specify what programming language they were using?
No, they didn't.
Okay. So I should also point out, we are now publishing AvaTax software development kits for 5 different languages. And these software development kits are available in your favorite programming language package manager. For C#, there's a package manager called NuGet. For Java, there's one called Maven. For JavaScript, and so on down the line. Whatever programming language you use, there is a software development kit that we every single month, the official of AvaTax APIs. And this is a collaborative development. We get pull to improve our API customers, and we're just looking to create something that's always useful to you. So to the person who asked that question, whatever programming language you're using, we would love it if you considered the AvaTax software development kit. If you do that, then you'll automatically get notified every time we publish a new SDK. And even more fun, if you use the SDK, all of our documentation, all of our code comments are embedded in the SDK. So in your Visual Studio or Eclipse editor, it will actually pop up context-sensitive help for every AvaTax function you use, and it will show you the exact documentation that you see here on the developer site. So I'm really a big fan of that. Rohit, can I ask, what's the next thing for connectors? What should we be doing now to help people connect to tax?
So the next big thing is this year, any net new versions of our connectors that we are on, or any new connectors that we are going to write for AvaTax is all going to be based on our new REST API. That's one of the bigger changes that we're making in 2018. That's like our confidence in the REST API has gone up so significantly that we are ready to move our 40% of Avalara's customer traffic to the REST API. That's one of the biggest thing that we're making happen in the connector space.
When you do that, are you going to be adding any new features?
Yes. So the new feature that we're going to add is probably landed cost and the whatever multi-tax capabilities that AvaTax will start supporting.
Can you explain, just for everyone on the call, what does Avalara consider landed cost?
So landed cost is a transaction. Say if you're shipping something from Canada to France, and it is you're provided like a HTC code, then you have like customs and tariffs and everything involved. There is like a landed cost, like duties and tariffs and fees that is calculated on that transaction or that in economic transaction, and that's what AvaTax does in terms of landed cost transactions. And
so I'd like to point out, I'm showing a screen here that highlights the landed cost documentation.
Right.
I wrote some blog posts on landed cost. Oh goodness, it's actually quite a while ago now. But I've actually assigned some team members to write some new blog posts and to update our documentation for landed costs.
Sure.
So that's going to be coming out in the next week or two.
Sure.
We've actually made significant extensions to our data for landed costs, and we're super excited about it because now you can get a whole lot more information that you couldn't get before.
Yeah, and not maybe what we'll do is our web e-com connectors or web-based connectors where we have customers doing business all over the world. We will try and write our landed cost integration for those connectors because customers are more interested in having this website of mine is based on this platform, and I always do international transactions, but I don't know how to calculate landed costs. So we want to have an integration for that.
Well, that'll be really exciting. I know sometimes when I'm flying out to visit my family in England and Ireland, I'll just sit next to someone on the plane, and they hear I do tax, and they go like, "Wow, can you calculate customs duties?"
True. That's one of the bigger things. I mean, it's just that space. The whole thing now changes from focus from North America to to being part of the global commerce now.
Yeah.
Avalara is now getting into full-blown integration into international commerce and tax calculation now. And then the other big things this year we are also doing is so we have a AvaTax update portal that we have for our customers to
Yes, if I'm right, that's admin.avalara.com, correct?
Exactly.
And this is a fantastic site that Rohit's team has built, and I'm just loading it up on the screen right now. If you haven't tried it out, I definitely recommend it.
Yeah, so we launched it last year, like early Q4. We have about 4,000 customers using it. This year's goal is to get 90% of our existing customers onto this.
But and I know they asked me not to mention customer numbers on this on these calls, so
okay.
let's.
Okay, I'm just going to say 90% right. of it, but the goal is as we move our customers from the old portal to the new portal, we are also adding net new features into our into our this new portal, which will have landed costs, which will have multi-tax tax calculation, like support from multi-type nexus and tax types that we will keep adding.
And I know, just since we're out of time right now, I know one of the requests I've gotten recently is this reports page on AvaTax Update. Rohit has built a ton of awesome reports, and people keep calling me and saying, why can't I calculate these reports in the API?
Exactly.
So I know we're working to catch up to Rohit there.
That's probably one of the API, I think later in the year we also will have a new implementation for our reports. It will be more modern and more sleek for customers to use it from our portal.
Great. Well, thank you so much for coming and hanging out with us, Rohit. I'm really glad to have learned from you for this API, and I'm grateful that you did so much work to make AvaTax possible. So thank you very much, and I hope you've had fun too. Thank you everyone for joining us today.